Fox News personality Greg Gutfeld shared his rather doom and gloom outlook on the future of the country during a panel discussion on the network this week. Let's watch.
This defiant refusal to reverse this decline argues against the survival of a country. What does that leave you with? It leaves you with you need to make war to bring peace, because you have a side that cannot change, because then that means an admission that their beliefs have been corrupt all the time. So in a way, you have to force them to surrender.
Or we could make love, not war.
I tried that once.
Or we have an election.
I had to go to a doctor.
Right. Elections. Yeah.
No, elections don't work. We know that. We know they don't work.
They do work.
Look what we have. Look what we have.
But
we had a moderate president, and we have crime exploding everywhere. We had a Democrat president promised that he was going to be moderate, promised that he was going to unite the country, and now we have a terrible education system, we have no border, we have crime everywhere. Every facet of society is in peril and in chaos because our elections don't matter.
No, elections do matter. We don't need to go to war for it. We go to the election booth and vote the people out who don't do the things you say.
You know, it's a stark argument to make, but I feel the frustration, and I feel that he's speaking for a lot of people who normally don't have a voice in the national conversation, let alone on a cable news network. And it's this idea that, you know, we've tried everything, we've done everything, and it doesn't seem like things are getting better. You know, whether or not Joe Biden was actually a Trojan horse and people believed that he was going to be a moderate and not sort of run to the left side of the Democrat Party and pursue a lot of these policies. We had Trump for 4 years, and even when Trump was in office, there was still chaos in the streets. You know, we had all of the riots and the protests, and it doesn't seem like, regardless of who's in the White House and sort of who's in control of Congress, things don't actually change. And these crime surges in cities around the country, you've got crime and the fentanyl crisis, especially, you know, touching on rural communities in the country who might think that they're sort of immune from some of these big city problems. It does seem, you know, to Greg's point, that nothing is working. Elections haven't solved the problems that Americans see in the long term even. You know, people who were happy with the policies that Trump implemented, you know, a lot of those things obviously didn't last, because look at the border, as Gutfeld pointed out. You know, things have not meaningfully gotten better. And I think this kind of goes back to some of what we were talking about in the segment about Hillary Clinton never being able to get over losing to Donald Trump, and this idea that, you know, people had had enough of the establishment politics and things always going the way that they wanted, and them serving special interests and lobbying firms and not the American people. But even when we got someone like Trump, who was sort of elected as a rejection of this establishment system, things didn't change in the long term. And even while he was still in office, like I just said, things were not necessarily all hunky-dory across the board. So what do you make of Gutfeld's point? Is he right that essentially elections have not achieved the things that Americans want to see get better in this country?
Yeah, I'm not sure I would define elections as the problem itself. I would define the establishment running candidates that fundamentally don't care about solutions to the problems our country faces as the main problem there. If you have people who are not interested in addressing the problem at its root, running for office, obviously the elections won't solve your problems. If you have people running who are willing to do that, and a political system that allows anyone who's a popular candidate to have a fair shake, then elections wouldn't be such a problem. I think the system which governs elections, that forces candidates into this two-party system that is not regulated by election law and is instead deemed party business, giving the establishment of that party say over which candidate ultimately wins, that is a problem. But we can change the way we run that. To blame democracy itself and make it seem like elections are the cause of the dysfunction in the country, I just don't think that's identifying the problem where it exists. If we had a candidate who was running, who said, hey, the United States has made it its explicit economic policy to keep a large population of people unemployed, that is what they intend to do. Congress could very well say, you know what, there's no reason everybody who wants a job in this country shouldn't have one. That's ridiculous. But instead, we have the Federal Reserve insisting that if unemployment reaches below a certain level, inflation will be a concern. And so before we see signs of inflation on the rise, they raise interest rates to make more people unemployed. They intentionally make it so that Americans are struggling to make ends meet on a regular basis. What are those people going to do? That's where we have crime. And so when we identify the problem at its root and we say, okay, you know what? let's let everyone who wants a job, who needs money to pay for their family's basic needs, which if you live in the United States of America, you need dollars to pay taxes, you need dollars to provide for yourself. It's the currency we use. If you make dollars unattainable for people to get and dollars the only means for them to meet their material needs, what do you expect? I mean, seriously, we just need one candidate to say, we've actually made this economy unable to live in for about 5% of the population, which is probably a larger figure when you consider actual unemployment, not just those who are looking for a job within 2 months. Like, seriously, we just need a candidate to run on that. So elections are not the problem, and unwillingness to address the problems in our country at its root, I think, is the main problem.
Yeah, I think perhaps Gutfeld's argument could have been substituted in a way with a point I made on yesterday's show, which was this idea the government is not your friend. It's not there to take care of you. It's there to keep going and doing the business that it's always been doing, like we've been talking about, this establishment sort of class, making sure that those people are comfortable and happy, and that comes at the expense of some people. On the other side of things, even though I, generally agree with Gutfeld in this case, some critics of his are saying that this language he used is dangerous and inciting violence. Jessica, what's your thought on that? Is this inciting rhetoric?
I don't think so. I don't think this is inciting violence. I mean, there, of course, is the path of direct action for change. I think it was extremely effective when you had organizers outraged that JP Morgan Chase was charging overdraft fees, and you had them show up to the CEO of JP Morgan Chase's country club and put some pressure on him where he was comfortable. That's an effective way to say, hey, you have this policy that's incredibly unjust. You're literally making poor people give you some of their money for being poor. As a bank, you have FDIC insurance. You're backed up by the government with all of your deposits. Certainly, if you're someone who is poor, you're not keeping above that threshold in your account where FDIC insurance won't cover it. The overdraft fees are an absurd policy that have enriched banks. And so when you have a bunch of people show up, they make the CEO uncomfortable simply by telling him what he's doing in front of his friends and how it's hurting people. I mean, that's the kind of public accountability where we have solutions. That leads to policy changes within banks. So you can absolutely pursue change without elections and also without violence. So I don't think it's this dichotomy that Fox News made it out to be. We either need to make love, not war, or we need war. I don't really see it as that. I think we need to hold people accountable who are in positions of power, which means a lot of people need to pay attention to things that a lot of them don't have time or energy to. They get home at the end of their workday and they're tired. No one wants to watch bad news when they get home after doing a 40-plus hour a week. So I get it, but I think if people are so fed up with what's going on in the country, maybe it's time to start putting pressure on the decision makers themselves.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's for probably too long been this expectation, again, that maybe the government is your friend and will advocate for your best interests. And you have agencies in the administrative state that are supposedly set up to protect consumers, that are there to supposedly represent your interest and protect you from monopolies and predatory practices and things like that. But I think what we've learned, some of those examples you mentioned, overdraft fees, things like that. Now we have concerns, especially among those, I think, on the right or those in the center who are honest about it, concerns about this practice of debanking practices or people or businesses that do things that these banks, boards, and leaders don't agree with. And I think it has had kind of a good effect, even though it's been rough to see, and that is making people wake up and realize that they do actually have to be active participants in the country if they want to make sure that what they want is actually what's prioritized, because they've realized that the government cannot be trusted to actually do what is best for its people. And I think we've seen that in a number of ways, whether it's been conservatives speaking up who are members of, retirement accounts that are managed by state pension boards, and making sure that the larger asset management companies are actually reflecting their desires and their wishes, which in a retirement account is generally return on investment and profit, and making sure that they're focusing on that so that way their entire life of hard work on behalf of a public agency doesn't somehow end up flushed down the toilet because of people making investment decisions based on something other than return on that investment that these workers made over their careers. I'd be interested to get your take on this idea of debanking. It's been something that has come about a few times where people have cited specific situations. There's concern about some companies, credit card companies specifically, that are sort of coding transactions for firearms or ammunition differently to sort of create this non-governmental watch list of people who have purchased firearms. There's obviously concern that that would be extended to people making other types of purchases. What is your take on where that might take us?
Yeah, I think a lot of the folks that raise, concerns about the digital dollar provided by the government, the Federal Reserve. It would effectively be cash digitized. So with the same kind of, anonymous transactions that you have when you use cash, but done over a pretty safe server where you don't have corporations extracting your information. Of course, the number one concern for many people is that, we live in the world of surveillance. The US government can surveil that data if they want to. They can track your transactions. There should be some safeguards against their ability to prosecute transactions if you use the digital dollar. I do think it's just as concerning if you're using Venmo, if you're using PayPal, if you're using banking apps for transactions, that now you have Chase Bank, JP Morgan Chase collecting your data. You have a lot of these large banks having so much information on you because they have your financial transactions. They can use that in nefarious ways as well. Also, the US government could subpoena that data. So we're going to need some protections for consumers, for anyone using any kind of digitized banking, whether it's with the Fed and it's with the government, with the digital dollar, or it's with Chase Bank. I think we need that for any kind of transaction. And so I really see things going in that direction where more people are paying attention to this, more people are asking these questions. We had a hearing in Congress about this not so long ago. And so I don't think the solution is for everybody to pull their deposits out and only use cash. But I do think a way forward here is to have a digital dollar and have some regulations as to what transactions can be tracked here.
Yeah, I will say I always thought when I was younger my grandfather was a little silly to have a coffee can full of cash always in the house because he didn't trust banks, being a child raised after the Depression. But now, the more I think about it, I think he might have been on the right track just to have something as a backup. We will continue tracking this banking issue and also whether or not war or peace is possible. We'll be back with more Rising right after this.